How do you find the opening of Kreisleriana? I mean, it's a very strange opening. It's as if you're just, the listener is sort of literally thrown right into the middle of a novel, you know, and you have to sort of find your way.
Yeah. I'll play a little bit just to make...
Great. That was my next question.
Strange way to start a piece. Actually, I never thought of the pressured speech part. It's a torrent. But I think that this, Schumann, as you know, as everybody knows, was the most literary of composers. He wanted to be a novelist. He was born into an atmosphere. His father was a bookseller. He was born into an atmosphere of great literariness. He wrote a lot. He was incredibly well-read. He fell under the spell of two writers in his adolescence, and with typical Schumannesque thoroughness, he read virtually all their works, sometimes many times. E.T.A. Hoffmann was one, and Jean-Paul Richter was the other. And the Kreisleriana, the title is based on a character from E.T.A. Hoffmann, a character of a mad or, would you say mad or wildly eccentric or something, yes. Something in there, violinist, Johannes Kreisler. And I see this opening, I think it probably would be clearer if we could see the music, because every three notes has an accent. A very unpianistic thing, in a certain way. I mean, one could play it as a kind of roulade, but actually I think it's meant to be like a manic violinist. A violinist with a larger range than an ordinary violinist, because it goes down there. But I think a super violin, say. Maybe Kreisler, if you have a mad violinist, he would have a bad violin. And so, this I see as a portrait of Kreisler. Then the other thing about it, which is particularly Schumannesque, is that it starts on the beat, but the left hand is off the beat. So the whole beginning, and this is characteristic of the piece, and will remain characteristic of the piece, your two hands are divided against each other. One hand is giving the beat, the other hand is consistently off until the last phrase. I haven't gotten there. And so this, I would say, one of the most characteristic Schumann gestures is to be off balance. To put the performer off balance, to put the listener off balance, to put the soul of the listener in a state of imbalance. He does it in so many ways, in so many pieces. He gives you the state of being uncertain. This, I think, is I would say, a profoundly unclassical thing to be. And this is one of the things that Schumann, I think, reveled in. And the other part of it, which is given at the beginning of the piece, is that you're in two. Your right hand is doing one thing, your left hand is doing another. This is not so unusual, but Schumann, later on in the piece, exploits this and has the two hands playing against each other in unusual ways, particularly in the last piece, where he writes that the left hand is always to be played very softly, the right hand has its material, the left hand plays quiet octaves, pianissimo always, light and free. So the left hand goes on with seemingly no consideration of the right hand, and in irrational ways, very hard to memorize, by the way. Every pianist who's ever played this piece said, how do you memorize that last piece? Because every time it brings it back, the left hand is in a slightly different place. The truth of the matter is, if you played slightly the wrong place, nobody but another pianist would know. The basic idea is to be off balance and to have the two hands against each other. This whole idea of the two-ness, the doppelganger, the double figure, the divided personality was one of Schumann's basic poetic ideas, which he shared with his favorite writer, Jean-Paul Richter, who has, all his books seem to be have divided characters. Each novel has a pair. different characters. And Schumann's version of this, which he wrote into some of his pieces, and he wrote it in his music journalism, was Florestan, the dramatic, turbulent, active, named after perhaps the Infidelio. And Eusebius, named after, I don't know why, there's a Saint Eusebius, but very poetic, dreamy, introverted. And the most personal pieces of Schumann that he wrote early on, like the Davidsbündler and so forth, each of them is signed with F or E, and some with both. And so this was, the Kreisleriana embodies this perhaps in a more, maybe a slightly more violent way than most of his other pieces, I think. It was meant to dedicated to Clara Schumann, and with Clara Wieck, whom he had not yet married, but was intently pursuing, and they had signed a pact, I think, by this time, but the father was against it and would remain against it, and was indeed tremendously stubborn. Finally, Schumann had to bring suit in order to marry his beloved Clara. And this was meant to be dedicated to Clara, and ended up, because of Clara's fear that her father would be even more furious than usual, being dedicated to his friend Chopin. So there's a history with this piece.
And at that court action, the legal action, my understanding is that one of the witnesses was, of all people, Franz Liszt. Mm-hmm. Franz Liszt was a character witness for Schumann, which is, therein lies a tale, I'm sure. You mentioned the opening as perhaps a madcap violinist, and I certainly could see that. If you think that Schumann in the Carnival, as you know, has his little portrait of Paganini, right? So
of course, yeah.
I mean, so he was capable of having the piano imitate orchestral effects or different instruments, and so there's that element. And Kreisleriana does seem to alternate between these two moods, the one extroverted, violent, passionate, the other dreamy.
In this first piece, I'm not going to play it, but it may be helpful, because after the stormy episode, this happens. Both a totally different Eusebius character, but also an indication of another great love of Schumann's, which became greater and greater as his creative life wore on, which is Bach. And so you hear in this patterning something of a feeling of a Bach prelude, with, of course, a very different spirit, with this romantic sentiment, not too Bachian. But later on, Schumann always, throughout his life, was a great scholar of Bach, and then there was a period where he wrote a great deal of many fugues and a very large body of polyphonic music. But in the Kreisleriana too, you can feel the contrapuntal interest. I would say that one of the things that separates him from Chopin, who was also a great Bachian and a lover of Bachian counterpoint, is that I think Schumann's counterpoint entered deeper into his music, and was more important for him, and a more fertile thing for him than even for Chopin. Or it took a different form, I would say.
Yeah, it's different in each case. Well, the idea of counterpoint emerges later in Kreisleriana, or Bach. The last movement is a kind of jig, and there's that movement which is a little fugato, and so it's like a topic almost in the Kreisleriana that emerges from time to time.